See, it's recording already. So just to make it clear what I mean when I say that Hanukkah is a real holiday, it is ancient. Now, it's an interesting thing, there's a Yiddish saying, and I don't know Yiddish well enough to say it in Yiddish, but I'll say it in English. There's a Yiddish saying that basically says that if you're going to tell a lie, don't tell a lie about something that's around the corner. All right? Tell a lie that's about something that's really far away, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 4,000. Don't tell a lie about something that happened a year ago. Because, most people can, most intelligent people will say, I was there, it didn't happen, or it happened differently. I have my own perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Hanukkah is a holiday that is ancient, and we have ancient documents still today that show us that it was a real holiday, and it wasn't just made up, and that it was just like a fabricated holiday. Now, you could say, I shouldn't say we could say, because we actually literally can't say, but there's a group of people, biblical scholars and such, who try to say that some of the things that happened in the Torah didn't happen, right? Or that the holidays aren't really holidays. They're all they're all in the time of the year that they're in because that's when Festivus was, or that's when the grains, or this, or some other that's the solar equinox, or whatever. There are all kinds of excuses for why the Jewish holidays are when they are, and some of it is somewhat true, by the way. But we also know that the Jewish holidays are when they are, because Hashem said so, and he took us out of Egypt in Pesach, so that's why we have Pesach when we have it in the middle of Nisan. It has nothing to do with the springtime or anything else. I mean, it could be that Hashem chose that time of the year because something else is going on. And we spoke about that in previous years, and how there's Kabbalistic things. The Sefer HaYetzirah talks about how Pesach is in Nisan, because Nisan is a time for liberation, a time for freedom, even before Pesach happened. Pesach maybe happened then because of the strong power that month has. So so that's where there's a little bit, a grain of truth. There's a grain of truth in every lie. So there's a grain of truth to saying that the Pesach doesn't have to be in Nisan. All right. Anyway, not going to get into all that. The point is that Hanukkah is a well-established holiday. How well established? Well, if I tell you that it's a 2,200-year-old holiday, you'll say, okay, 2,200, 2,000, what's the difference? And the difference is, as you can think about, you can imagine, if I tell you something happened in 2000, right, you'll say, oh, that was a little while ago. If I say something that happened in 1800, you'll say, that's a long time ago. My goodness, that's before Dickens was born, 1800. America was barely a country then. Yeah, but that was 200 years ago. The difference between 2,000 years ago and 2,200 years ago is also, drum roll please, or not really, also 200 years. It's a difference of 200 years. So you could say, if I tell you a holiday was established 200 years ago, right? You'll say it's an old holiday. Wow, it's a holiday since 1800. It's an old holiday, right? Thanksgiving, which some people celebrated not so long ago, is kind of that old. It has a lot of traditions. The Puritans landed about 150 years before that, so 350 years ago, like the 1670s, whatever, right? Am I doing the math right? Yeah. All right, so yeah, it's an old holiday celebrating an old thing. But even now, a lot of people, if you stop them in the street, they'll be hard pressed to explain to you why we have a holiday called Thanksgiving, and why we have some of the customs that we have for Thanksgiving. Why do we eat turkey? What is it about pumpkins? or corn or whatever. What so some people know. Some people know some of the history of the foods, et cetera, et cetera. What are some other customs we have? The little children having their the Thanksgiving presentation to their family with their paper Amish hats, right? As if it was the Amish. The Pilgrims weren't Amish, by the way. They actually were quite violent against the Amish, but we're not going to talk about that. Right? The little girls wear a little paper bonnet, right? So why? Why did they do that? Or did they do that? Or how old are these customs? So we can ask questions like that. I tell you that 2,200 years ago, the holiday of Hanukkah started for sure, and we have documents to prove it. Those documents go back to almost that time. It's amazing, right? We don't have any documents today that go back to the original Thanksgiving explaining why there was a holiday called Thanksgiving. We have some documents here and there. There's a poem here, there, whatever, but there's very little, and very little explains why we have turkey. And by the way, just in case you're very curious, so I can save you some time looking this up on Wikipedia. The reason we eat turkey on Thanksgiving has nothing to do with Thanksgiving. It has more to do with the fact that turkey farmers, in the time that Abraham Lincoln was president, asked the president then to make turkey a part of the Thanksgiving holiday in order for more people to buy the turkeys, because they had an oversupply. They had the opposite of a supply chain problem. They had too many turkeys and needed to get rid of them because nobody was eating turkey. As
So what
you
did
may
they
or may
eat
not know, it's
beforehand?
not a very popular bird. What was that?
What did they eat beforehand?
Chicken, cows, almost pig, or almost any animal. Why turkey? Right? It's not the most delicious animal. It's not easy to cook. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people, this time of the year, they talk about their little secrets. Here's my trick to making it juicy on the inside. Whatever it is. My favorite recipe, the thing that gets my family eat turkey the last couple of years, is I air fry it. Guess what? That's new technology. You couldn't air fry a turkey until 5-10 years ago, whatever it was, right? So I guarantee the Pilgrims didn't do that. I guarantee Abraham Lincoln didn't do that. So you can't believe everything you hear on the internet, said Abraham Lincoln. But it's a joke. You didn't say that. Okay. Anyway, but the point is, I want to show you a document, an ancient document today. I'm going to share with you an ancient document. How do you like that? It's older than the Talmud. It's older than the Mishnah, and it's so old that the rabbis actually had a conversation, quite a bit of discussion about whether to include it in Tanakh. Wow. So let's see this document. The document is called, let me share my screen now. The document is called the Book of Maccabees, which you may or may not have heard of. Most people talk about how there's 2 books of Maccabees. There's actually more. And they are part of something called the Apocrypha. Now, we've mentioned the Apocrypha before in other classes and other contexts. And before you get too scared, I'm not trying, the Apocrypha is not a Christian work, although it is included in most translations of the King James Bible in the back. So it's a semi-biblical work, and there are other books of the Apocrypha that some people think are biblical, which are not. There's a book of Judith, also having to do with the Hanukkah story, by the way. But whatever, not going to get into that right now. There's the book of Ben Sira, which is quoted by the Talmud, but not a biblical work. Why isn't it biblical? Simple answer is the rabbis decided it does not have Ruach HaKodesh. We've mentioned this before. Ruach HaKodesh is some sort of spiritual sensitivity, some sort of almost prophetic ability to convey a message in words that are true forever. All the books that are in Tanakh, even books that are talking about a particular war or a particular time period or a particular person, all of those stories and everything else could be applied to us somehow. We can learn things from them. There's a message there, a deep, deep message. And the rabbis decided in their infinite wisdom that way, way, way outshines anything we can even experience nowadays. They knew that these books did not belong in Tanakh. So, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have a mention of Hanukkah in halachic literature until not even the Mishnah, but even later on in the Gemara, where the Gemara starts talking about what kind of candles can be used for the menorah, which is something, God willing, we'll be speaking about later. That happens to be, the Gemara there is on the section, is in Shabbat, and very towards the beginning, in page 21, 22, 23, whatever, that's where the discussion of Hanukkah is. My Hanukkah, the question is, what is Hanukkah? Right? And then it concludes with the Zot Hanukkah, this is Hanukkah. Anyway, so this whole long discussion is all really about what kind of oils are okay to use in your candles for menorah. Because on Shabbat, we're very particular about what kind of oil we should use. It has to be clear oil. It can't be smelly oil. It has to be pretty. It has to last long. It can't make weird fumes or anything like that, etc., etc. Therefore, in contrast to that, you can literally use anything that burns as your Hanukkah menorah light. Yes, ideally olive oil, but that's because the miracle that we know of happened with olive oil. But there are other reasons as well. Anyway, let's suffice it to say that that's the discussion over there. So back to the Book of Maccabees. So the Book of Maccabees that I'm most familiar with there are two. There's the first Book of Maccabees, which is really basically a list of battles and wars that the brothers, the Hashmonaim, fought against the Greeks. We say Greeks, but really Syrian Greeks. We mentioned that last week. But there are a lot of battles and there are a lot of miracles. A lot of those miracles are not mentioned in that book. It's mostly a book about the war. It's very, very physical, very, very nationalistic, quite violent in places. And it reads very often, I don't know how many of you have read old books like the Odyssey or Beowulf or things like that, where you just have like certain chapters where it's a whole like list of everything that went on the ship. Right? And they took the books and they took the boxes, and there's 3 boxes, and some of them are red, and some of them are blue, and they took 70 sheep, but they didn't take 70 cows. They took this whole like list, right? There's a lot of lists like that in ancient books, Beowulf, like I said, etc. And the first book of Maccabees reads the same way. It's literally, I mean, for those somebody's interested in like the history of war, might be very exciting, but for most people like me who want to, a little more, personal side of the story, a little more, God in the story, it's a little tedious, honestly. All right, so the second book of Maccabees reads very, very differently. That's where you have the stories that we know of, many of us know of. For example, that fall into halacha. For example, Mishnah Berurah tells us, and I'm almost like 100% sure most of you on the call know this, but there is a custom mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, goes back all the way back to the Rishonim, so at least 600-700 years at least. There's a custom that women don't work while the candles are lit, at least the first 30 minutes that the candles are lit. Women don't work. What kind of work? That gets into halacha, which we might discuss, we might as well discuss, but let's say work that has to do with like domestic work. Women don't do that during those first 30 minutes. Not men. Men can do anything they want, and they should, but women have a time-tested ancient custom not to do any work for the first 30 minutes. Now, it happens to be funny enough that you might want to ask this, but I don't know if you've noticed, but it's often during those 30 minutes that women want to work the most, right? Like all day long, you've been sitting back, relaxing, and then finally you lit the candles. Now you want to cook. Now you want to clean. Now you want to do laundry. So what happened? So what happened is the Yetzer Hara is what happened. You always want what you can't or shouldn't do. right? So that's what happens. So try to plan ahead and make sure you don't have any work that needs doing during those first 30 minutes. For example, if you're going to cook, you should be really eating or whatever when the candles are lit. So don't do any work then. Just sit down and eat. And when you're done eating, 30 minutes should pass. But anyway, why do we have this custom? Says the Mishnah Berurah. It's because of the story about Yehudit, the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. By the way, he's mentioned in a few places in the Book of Maccabees. This Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and his daughter was set to get married, and the Greek general wanted to have his way with her first, as was the custom, as is still the custom in many ancient or in certain parts of the world where there's a person of power who wants to take advantage of the weaker people, like in Hollywood. Not going to get into it anyway. So whatever the case may be, so she says, okay, fine. You know what? I'm not going to let you force yourself upon me. Let's do this the gentle way. Why don't you come over for a party first? And she gives him dairy foods to eat, and she gives him wine to drink. He gets sleepy. He falls asleep. She cuts off his head. She shows it to his soldiers, and they run away. And the whole battle is won that way. So that's a story that gives us at least two famous halachot. One is for women to celebrate, this to be like a women's holiday in some sense, because this battle was won by a woman. But also, the custom of eating cheese or dairy foods comes from this incident. Where's that incident from? It's not in the Gemara. It's not in the Mishnah. As far as I know, it's not in the Midrash, although I haven't studied the entire Midrash, but it's definitely in the Book of the Maccabees, second Book of Maccabees, to be specific. All right, so I want to read to you proof that Hanukkah is an ancient holiday. That's what I brought you this book for, right? Let's prove to you that this is an ancient book. And by the way, I'm getting a lot of the information that I'm sharing with you right now from a podcast that I listened to. That was Sfarim Chatter podcast, and there was an interview with Professor Malka Simkovich, who is a historian, a professor, and she apparently wrote. She's the Ryan Chair of Jewish Studies and Director of Catholic Jewish Studies at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. Go figure. She's a frum lady, and she discusses a book about Second Temple literature, which is available. I can give you the link if you're very interested in that kind of literature. But anyway, so she wrote a book about Second Temple literature, and this is what she had to say about. And this is what we're talking about. Hanukkah happened during the Second Temple, so any kind of literature that was written then is what she's an expert in. To make that clear. All right, so I'll just read it in English real quick. By the way, we're not sure. This is very important. I said this last class. I want to make this very clear. Anything that we have in the Apocrypha now, besides what was quoted in the Talmud, any Hebrew translation is just that, a Hebrew translation from the Latin translation, which is from the Greek translation, right? So it's not necessarily accurate, and the gematrias with it, and there's an extra yud in the Hayehudim. You can't do that anymore, because that is only for things that were kept in the original state, as were all of the books of the Tanakh. Amazingly enough. All right, so let's so this is going to be the beginning of the Book of Maccabees, of the second Book of Maccabees, is actually a letter that introduces the book to another group of Jews. Which group of Jews? Let's see. So this is the Jews in Jerusalem, in the land of Judah, to their Jewish brethren in Egypt, peace and salvation. Wow. Who's writing this? So this is obviously being written by Jews in Jerusalem, in the land of Yehuda. And who is receiving this letter? The Jews of Egypt. Now, you may or may not know this, but this is very clear in the Mishnah and in the Gemara. There was a huge, estimated at maybe 500,000 people, huge population of Jews in Egypt during the Second Temple period. Now, this is surprising to you, probably, because it's like, wait a minute, we had a Jewish land, we had Israel, we had control over Israel at least some of the time. Okay, there's wars going on, but there's a huge group of Jews living in Egypt. The reason I say it was mentioned in the Gemara is because the Gemara, Mishnah even talks about how there was a temple built there, a Beit HaMikdash. During the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, there was another Beit HaMikdash in Egypt. True story. Were they from Yehuda? They seem to have been, yes. They seem to have been Jews, as is going to be clear in the next few lines. What they say is, God bless you, and remember you his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's talking to the Jews, and give you a whole heart to fear him and serve him, and all your heart and all your soul. God will open your heart to reflect on his Torah and keep his commandments. It will give you blessing and peace. If only the Lord will listen to your prayers and be merciful to you, and from hardship he will save your lives. This is our prayer to you for all times. In the year 169, now figuring out the years is a little complicated because this is not the Jewish calendar, right? The Jewish calendar, this would be the year 3000 something or other, right? Let's say 3500, just to give an even number. But years were measured in different ways at different times. So this is approximately, let's say, 200 years before the year one. By the way, there is no year zero, so there's no such thing as year one. So BCE, so about, say, 200 BCE, this letter is being written, and they call it the year 169 because it is 169 years into the Greek kingdom that they are referring to. The time of the reign of King Demetrius. We wrote to you concerning all hardships that came upon us with the betrayal of Yeshua and his cohorts. This is talking about, obviously, or possibly about Jesus. Right, that doesn't make sense. Yeshua. Anyway, whatever. They set ablaze the gate to the courtyard. They spilled innocent blood in the land. We prayed to the Lord our God. He heeded our voices. We offered sacrifices and fine flour for the Minika offering. We lit the lamps and placed the showbread on the table of the Lord. So this is all typical Beit HaMikdash type things to do, right? And then we requested of you to celebrate Chanukkah II, the dedication of the altar, in the month of Kislev. What? Dedication of the altar in Kislev? Well, that sounds a lot like Hanukkah. That's right, because Hanukkah is in Kislev, and that's what it is. It is the dedication of the altar that we're celebrating. It was in the year 188. The returned and wrote for them these words, and then it goes into the rest of the letter, which the rest of the book, which is all about all the different miracles and things that happen in the time of the Second Temple. So there are different sources we have besides that. So that's one source. There's also a book called Megillat Ta'anit, which was also mentioned very often in the Gemara. There's a book that we still have today, and it's not the Mishnah Ta'anit, which also exists, part of the Mishnah. It's actually what we're learning right now in Daf Yomi. But there's a book called Megillat Ta'anit, which literally translates as the Scroll of Fasts. And although it sounds like it's only going to talk about sad days and fast days, it does. It also, it also mentions the days that you can't fast, you can't use as sad days, and includes there Purim and Hanukkah and other what are called local holidays that the Jewish people are allowed to have. I don't know if you know this, but the Gemara in Ta'anit uses actually this source as part of the proof for this, has a whole discussion about if a salvation comes to a particular Jewish community, that Jewish community has an obligation to celebrate that day on the calendar as a Yom Tov and to say Hallel on that day. for the rest of history. So let's say, God forbid, the Jewish people, the Jewish communities in San Diego are somehow threatened. God forbid. We shouldn't know of such things, right? Somehow threatened. We're not allowed to pray, or we're not allowed to exhibit Jewishness, or worse, we have to convert to Islam, or whatever, right? Whatever it is, whatever the government says, we have to do. And if God forbid it's something bad, what do? We survive through it, because we always do. And then after we survive, the rest of the community in San Diego is supposed to then make that day that we survived into a Yom Tov. That's the law. And there are certain communities, it's not so common anymore, because a lot of our ancient communities have been, unfortunately, completely wiped out. But there were certain days when certain communities would have a Yom Tov, and would celebrate it that way. And they would say Hallel, and you couldn't fast on those days. You couldn't say Kel Maleh on those days. And that's for funeral purposes. You couldn't give eulogies on those days. Have you ever been to a funeral? You've probably been to a funeral where the officiating rabbi says, "I'd give because today is a Yom Tov or something like that. It's a special day, so we're not allowed to give a eulogy on this day." That's because of this rule, right? There's certain days you can't give eulogies, you can't fast, etc. What ends up happening, by the way, very often, this is a little just between you and me, and thousands of other people will make this in the future on YouTube or Facebook. So it just so happens that rabbis usually can figure out a way to give a nice eulogy anyway, right? We can't give a eulogy today, but but today. But I just wanted to say a few words, not a eulogy, but by way of just complimenting the family, or whatever it is. As long as it ends with a nice, a nice push for a tzedakah contribution, it's all fine. Or so they think. Anyway, that's a little rabbi secret there. All right. So, but seriously, there are certain days you're not supposed to give eulogies or fast, and those days are mentioned in this book called Megillat Ta'anit. Now, Megillat Ta'anit also mentions, like I said, Hanukkah, and like I said, it's an ancient work quoted in the Talmud, right? Okay. That said, we have so it's definitely an ancient holiday, and it's not always clear why we celebrate it, though. What do I mean? So you don't have to show your hands, but I'm pretty sure almost everybody here has heard of somebody by the name of Josephus, right? We may or may not have positive feelings about Josephus, but that's because we don't know everything about him. He was definitely in the Roman legion. He's basically a general. He's also a historian, and he wrote the history of the Jewish people in a 20-volume book. The history of the Jewish people up to 2,000 years ago took 20 volumes for him to write, right? In the 12th volume of his book of Jewish history, in the 7th book, in the 7th chapter of the 12th book, he talks about Hanukkah. He calls it the holiday of lights, right? Wow. Calls it the holiday of lights. And by the way, Josephus is ancient. It's before the Talmud, right? It's around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, thereabouts, about 100 years later. No, take that back. About 70 years later. So that's not ancient history, right? Like, think back 70 years, and whatever happened in Jewish history, we probably are pretty familiar with, right? That's how familiar Josephus was with the destruction of the temple, right? It only happened 70 years or so before he was writing. Josephus also, in that book, he writes about the holiday of lights, and he starts saying something very strange, very unique for him, because he's usually very confident. He sounds he sounds like a general. He knows what he's talking about. He's the expert in Jews and Jewish history, etc. By the way, he wrote a book, just so you know, in case you're one of those people who thinks he's a traitor to the Jews or something. Just so you know, he wrote a book defending Judaism, defending the Jewish religion against the Roman religion, which is amazing because I don't know if you know this, but he was pretty well known even in his time. He was being paid to write by the Caesar, and if the Caesar felt at all kind of how do you say it? What's the popular word nowadays? Offended. If the Caesar would have felt offended, it wouldn't just be like a Karen outburst from the Caesar. It would be off with your head, and that would be it. So Josephus risked quite a bit to back up the Jewish religion. That was one of his works. All right. Aside from that, so back to chapter 7 in section 7 of book 12 of the history of the Jews, a 20-volume work. Right. So he talks about the holiday of lights, and he's pretty confident everywhere else. And all of a sudden, when he gets to Hanukkah, what he says is, "I don't really know why we celebrate it. Like I don't understand why we celebrate it." And he gives it's probably the holiday of lights because it's a sort of it's an analogy to wisdom. We try to celebrate our wisdom. He gives all kinds of funny answers about why we light menorahs. So it's not like it's kind of strange, and it seems that. And by the way, he usually quotes sources also. He's like since the beginning of classic, historians. So it's a little bit strange that he doesn't know why we celebrate Hanukkah. But what is obviously true? We celebrated Hanukkah. Josephus celebrated Hanukkah. He might not have known why, because it was already a 400-year-old holiday. Just like some of us don't know why we celebrate Hanukkah, really, but it's an ancient holiday, so we're going to celebrate it. It was an ancient holiday already. That's what I wanted to prove to you. Even by the time of Josephus, it was already ancient enough that he celebrated it, called it the Festival of Lights, and yet didn't know what it was about. But why didn't he know what it was about? It's very, very clear why he didn't know what it was about. Same reason that the rabbis in the Talmud asked, "My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah?" Because what happened? What was the end result? What happened, really? So we all know there was this oil, there was a little bucket of oil, and for some reason, it was also not clear why all the other ones were trashed, and why this one survived, and why this one didn't have enough oil, and why they needed pure oil to begin with. The menorah in the Beit HaMikdash did not need the purest of the pure oil. So there's discussion about it, and the rabbis talk about it. Yitzchak has a whole essay on this. We're not going to get into that right now. But whatever it is, there was definitely something going on with this little jar of oil that the Hashmonaim found. They lit the menorah, and then what? Did they win the war? No, not even close. That wasn't even the end of that part of the war. The war went on for another 4 years before they felt like a semblance of the Hashmonaim being in charge. And so they felt like they were they're independent-ish, right? So that was, between, let's say, 163 and 167, or actually it goes backwards because it's before the Common Era. So it's 167 to 163, right? So, and only then did the war actually seem to cool down enough that the Hashmonaim felt in charge. And about 25 years later, the Greeks rolled back in with the reinforcements and took over completely for the next hundreds of years, right? Until the temple was destroyed, the Jews didn't really have independence, right? So what happened? What are you celebrating? That's what's going on in Josephus's head, right? That's what I want you to understand. See, he's a general, he's a soldier, and for him, a celebration is like, we won, so let's celebrate. He's scratching his head. What are you celebrating? You lost. All right, so then you think, okay, so all the rabbis tell us it was a war against Hellenism. It was a war against Hellenism. It's the Jews against the Hellenists, and we won because we're not Hellenists anymore. And then you look around, and I don't want to. This isn't the place for Musa or anything, but you look around, and I don't want to badmouth anybody, believe me, but just if you're honest with yourself, we are all Hellenists, more or less. I mean, almost all of us. I mean, how many of us disregard science, right? I'm pretty sure all of us kind of respect it. Maybe we don't know it very well, but we all respect it, as we're taught to do in like every school, right? It's school education. That's part of Hellenism. I mean, there's Jewish education, there's chinuch, but chinuch is either about learning about a trade, the work you're going to do, or chinuch is about learning Torah, which is supposed to be supported by the work you do. But no other schooling is really part of chinuch, technically. I mean, unless you're a Hellenist, which we kind of are. We have certain humanistic ideas. We're much more comfortable with Torah when it deals with how nice we're supposed to be to other people. Which, by the way, true. It's in the Torah. Don't get me wrong. We're supposed to be nice to people. That's part of the way of the Torah. But we're much more comfortable with that than with the parts of the Torah that tell us not to be nice to people, like where we're told to kill out a Amalek. And most of us are not comfortable with that. At least I'm not comfortable with that. But I don't know about you. You guys are like, okay, I'm sharpening my spear already. And so I don't know. I'm not much of a warrior. But
it was, yeah, it's also like, I don't know, like on Purim, like in Israel, you see like people hanging like fake Hamans from like their windows.
Right, and you're kind of
Like,
disgusted by that, right?
Kind of creepy. Yeah, it's creepy.
Right. Hey, it's called an effigy, right? So, by the way, that custom of hanging effigies of Haman or hanging effigies of Antiochus or any of our enemies, that goes back to at least the Middle Ages, at least a good 1,000 years or so. And the Christians did it too, by the way, usually the Jewish people, anyway, Jewish effigies. But whatever it is, the point is that, yeah, you're right. It is a little creepy. It's a little like what's wrong with you? Like, okay, yeah, so Haman was bad, boo, but boo is enough, yeah. I'm Yotzi hating Haman. I don't really have to think about how much how evil he is. Right, so we are in the end. Judaism has never actually made real peace with Hellenism. So what are we celebrating? What's really going on in Hanukkah? What is it? What is all this? So Josephus didn't get it, and I would venture to say most of us don't really get it. I would suggest that maybe the rabbis got it. More than just suggest. I'm telling you, the rabbis got it. And how do you know? It's because of the prayer that they composed to celebrate Hanukkah. And what's the prayer? Al Hanisim. In the Al Hanisim prayer, you have a combination of both books of Maccabees. What do I mean by that? Let's look at the prayer. I'm not going to take the time to Safaria this for you. You'll have to take my word for it. And I mentioned this a little bit in my Parsha video last week, if you had a chance to see it. But say Al Hanisim ve'al Purkan ve'al Gvurot ve'al Tishot ve'al Milchamot she'asita la'avatin la'bayamim ha'em b'zman hazeh. Thank you, Hashem, for the miracles and the wonders and helping us win the war in that time. Nowadays, this time of the year. B'mei Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the son of in the days of Matityahu was the son of, that's right, Yochanan Kohen Gadol. You might have heard of him before. He's also Yehudit's father. So in other words, Matityahu is the brother of Yehudit. I don't know. Woo. This small world. All right. So anyway, so Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So this happened then, and Matityahu's sons, the Maccabees, Yehuda, Maccabee, etc., etc. The kingdom of of Greece went to do evil things upon the nation of Israel. He kept us away from learning Torah. And it kept us from doing the chukim, your laws, particularly the law of Brit Milah, as we mentioned in other times. But we weren't satisfied with that. Oh, we can't do Jewish practice? That's not good. Not good for us. You stood for us at this difficult time. You fought their fights. You judged their judgments. You put the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the evil into the hands of the righteous, the sinners into the hands of those who study your Torah. So what do I mean when I say that the rabbis combined the two books of Maccabees? Remember, the first book is this battle, that battle, this battle, that battle, this many carts and this many horses, that many elephants and this many boats. Right? It's all very systematic, lists, etc., etc. It's all about the war. Comes along the second book of Maccabees, and like the Maccabees said, it's all about the nace. There's miracles going on. There's the candles, and the Hannah and her 7 sons is in that book. The Yehudit is in that book. These miracles happen. You can argue Yehudit is a little less miraculous. It's kind of battle oriented, but there are miracles, and people get killed by frying. There's a whole, literally, fried in oil. Somebody gets killed by being fried in oil. It's in the book. I'm not going to get into the whole book of Maccabees. It gets into some gruesome details sometimes. Actually, it's funny. I mentioned this podcast, right? So the professor Malka Simkovich, so she suggests that perhaps that's our obsession with fried foods, possibly because there's so much frying going on. Anyway, but I'm not sure. Even she kind of laughed when she said it. So I don't know how serious she was about that. But either way, yeah. The
gingerbread man?
Sorry, the gingerbread.
Sound like the gingerbread man?
Not my gingerbread book. All right, so I don't know.
You know the idea behind it?
I don't know. I'm a little bit scared.
Oh. Did you watch how Christmas, that was why I learned about Coca-Cola.
Oh.
And Santa Claus, apparently, not pagans would have one day to attack their enemies, which were usually Jews, and when they would kill them, they made cookies that looked like them, and then they would eat them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the gingerbread man.
Uh-huh.
That they ate on Christmas.
Nice. All right. Well then, horrible. So basically, like a voodoo doll that you would eat to show your control over your enemy. Beautiful. Anyway, so yeah, we don't think we have that kind of power, so we're not going to do that. But anyway, back to this though. The reasons we celebrate Hanukkah, according to Al Anisim, is because of the miracles also, and because of the wars. You help us with the wars. You help the mighty be defeated by the weak, the many in the hands of the few. So that's all the first book of Maccabees. No, that's just you. I hear drilling. Yeah, drilling or something. Maybe it's a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. So do I. So does my dog. All right. So back to this stuff. So one thing is the wars, and the other part is the miracles, and both of those combined are celebrated in Al Hanisim. And it really shouldn't surprise us, though, that people like Josephus didn't really get what the holiday was about, because there doesn't seem to be a point. Why was there a miracle? What was the point of saving us for a short time? So one simple answer is that we were able to do the mitzvot again. Because if we were to actually be stopped permanently from doing mitzvot, that would have killed us. We would not be a Jewish people today. We need to do mitzvot. We need to have the Torah. We need to have mitzvot. We need to have Torah, or else we don't have a Judaism. Judaism without, and by the way, you've probably seen people like this, who are very proud of being Jewish, and what they do to prove it is they eat deli food. They make sure that their rye bread is properly ryed, or kosher style. Yes, their pickle is good and sour, whatever it is. So as if that's Judaism. Now, by the way, happens to be that our ancestors in Europe probably ate that food too. Okay, pastrami is actually much more recent than you think. It's actually about 100 years old. I'm not going to get into that now. But the other foods that they sell in delis and diners and stuff like that, those kosher style foods, those are actually Jewish foods of a very particular group of Jews, the Jews of Europe. So like Moroccan Jews, when they see a deli, they're like, that's not kosher, and it's not kosher, it's not Jewish style. My Saba never ate anything like that in Morocco. It's probably true. They probably didn't have, I don't know, they might have had pickles, but not sour pickles. It'd be like more like Israeli pickles, I imagine, Persian cucumbers, whatever it was. It's completely different food. So these have become part of our culture, but it's not going to last. That by itself is not going to survive. A Jew who only lives his or her Judaism through that kind of behavior is not going to be able to pass on Judaism to the next generation, because all they see is food, right? And the next generation will say, that's good food, but sort of tamales. I like tamales too. So I'm going to find a girl or a guy who makes tamales, and forget about this deli sandwich. It's way too much cholesterol anyway. So, I'm just crazy example off the top of my head. That's Judaism is not about gefilte fish. It's not just about latkes, because guess what? I know Gentiles who like latkes. So it doesn't make you Jewish or not Jewish if you like latkes. And hold on to your seats. I know Jewish people who don't like latkes. Maybe it's because it's made out of potatoes. I don't know, but but whatever the case may be, that's not where we're holding. If that's all you have, you don't have much. You definitely don't have anything of substance to hold on to, and definitely nothing of substance. If you might be able to hold on to it because you saw even more Judaism in your past, but for you to pass that on to the next generation, and the next generation gets watered down and watered down and watered down to the point where there's nothing really left. And that's what we're seeing a lot today. There's a lot of people who know that their grandmother, grandfather, whatever, that was Jewish, and they were raised with certain Jewish customs, as they're called, rituals. I like that word, or really dislike the word. Right? So these rituals meant something to the people who were doing them, but they mean nothing now. They mean nothing. There's nothing about miracles. There's nothing about God. Find a popular Hanukkah song that even mentions the word miracles. I'm outside of the Orthodox world. It's not, the miracle is our togetherness. The miracle is how we care about each other. We're all alike. I could do this all day, by the way. Tikkun olam, right? Clean a beach, or whatever. So there's no real substance to what a lot of people are doing, and the end result is that it's going to be very little to pass on. And that's exactly what we're celebrating when we celebrate Hanukkah. We're celebrating the fact that they did carry it on, because there was a substance there, because they learned Torah. These evil people, these evil Syrian Greeks, were given over into the hands of the Oskei Toratacha, the people who are osake, the people who strove to learn your Torah, who suffered and sacrificed to learn Torah, and to pass it on to the next generation, and the next generation, and the next generation. Well, eventually the Mishnah was written down, and a few more generations, and the Gemara was written down, and a few more generations, and then the Zohar was written down, etc., etc. And then the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Vilna Gaon, and the Baal Shem Tov, and whatever stream of Judaism you come from, or Achaim, right? The Ben Ish Chai. Eventually comes down to us, and we have Gedolim still today, still learning Torah. We have Rav Chaim Kanievsky, etc., and we can still have Judaism, all because of that miracle. That's what that miracle meant. It meant that there's going to be a continuation if we keep doing what we're supposed to do. That's what Hanukkah is, and that's what Josephus couldn't understand, obviously, because we lost the war. And we lost even the philosophical war. So what are we celebrating? We're celebrating that it continued. We're celebrating that even Josephus kept Hanukkah. And I don't know what Ben Josephus or Bat Josephus was like. I don't know how Jewish his children were. That's not for here. I'm not that much of a historian to know his children. But that generation had people who kept Torah. Every generation did. We, as opposed to this other religion that we mentioned at the beginning of the class, who have a famous symbol for a holiday that comes from a soda bottle, right? They have a dark ages. They have a whole almost 1,500 years where their major legal and religious authorities made it illegal to learn to read, so that they would have control over the people, right? We never had that. Our rabbis have always encouraged us to read. What, you don't know how to read? Let me sit down and teach you. This is an olive. This is a bet. I want you to know as much as I know. That's what our rabbis tell us. Because we want Judaism to continue, not just amongst the upper echelon, the gilded chambers of the halls of halacha. So, in terms of halacha, which is one of the things I wanted to talk about today, we should there are a few interesting questions of halacha that come up, and they may have already come up. It's worth discussing some issues. Somebody asked me recently what to do about going out of you're lighting somebody else's house. Okay, is it permitted? So this is a question a lot of rabbis get. Is it permitted to recite the blessing over Hanukkah candles that are kindled outside one's home? In other words, at a Hanukkah party, on a school, a public hall, a public display. You go to a party, you're lighting your Hanukkah candles there. Can you make the bracha there? So several contemporary poskim address this issue, and the consensus is that it is not permitted. They explain that the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles was instituted specifically to be performed in one's home or in a place where one is residing temporarily. Reciting the blessing over candles lit outside one's home may be a bracha levatala. The only exception to this rule is when candles are lit in shul between mincha and mariv in the shul, and that's where they're supposed to be lit. It may be argued that any public lighting is similar to the lighting in shul, but for several reasons, the poskim strongly reject this argument and recommend that one avoid reciting the blessings in any setting other than in one's home or temporary dwelling or in a shul. This, by the way, is the source for this is the source for this I'm getting is from Rabbi Daniel Newstad, so a posek. There might be other opinions, but this is his opinion. A common question that comes up very often, there is quite a bit of references to the fact that one should light Hanukkah candles after praying mincha. So you pray mincha, then you can light Hanukkah candles, then you can pray Mariv afterwards. Ideally, actually, you should probably daven Mariv first, but we're not going to get into that now. But are you allowed? What happens Erev Shabbat? Especially, I don't know if you know this, but Hanukkah is always in the winter. Surprise, surprise. And therefore, it's always on the early Shabbat. Shabbat starts at 4:30. Mincha, when are you going to pray Mincha? And when are you going to light? So, should you pray Mincha before lighting Hanukkah candles on Erev Shabbat? Good question. If possible, one should pray Mincha on Friday before lighting Hanukkah candles. There are two reasons for this. Number one, the afternoon Tamid service, which is what Mincha is modeled on, was always brought before the lighting of the Menorah in the Beit HaMikdash. So that's why you do the Tamid before you do the Menorah. That was the order in the Beit HaMikdash. That's the order still today. And the second reason is davening Mincha after lighting Hanukkah candles appears contradictory, because what are you saying by lighting Hanukkah candles? You're kind of saying it's the next day. It's nighttime. Right? How many candles are you lighting? Right? And tonight you lit 2, right? So you're saying it's the second night, second day. If you're praying Mincha, you're saying it's the first day still. And so it's a little bit of a contradiction. So those are some of the reasons why it's best to daven Mincha first. However, if no early minyan is available, and I don't know about where other people live, but where I live, there is no early minyan, which is okay because I probably couldn't make it on a Friday anyway. Then it is better to thank you. It is better to first light and daven with a minyan afterwards. Working people who are unable to daven mincha before lighting the menorah, because that would cut their Friday even shorter. It's a short Friday. Should light candles first and then daven mincha in shul with a minyan. Not a problem.
Okay, question.
Yes.
In the bracha, we say lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah.
Correct.
But we like more than one. We should say lahadlik nerot. Like on the third, fourth, we did more than one.
Hadlik nerot shel Hanukkah.
No, it says lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. But when ner is one, well, we like more than one.
Maybe it's
You like more than one after the first night. That's true.
Yeah, so then maybe why don't we say lahadlik nerot?
Good question.
Yeah.
I've never looked. Does anybody have an answer? I've never.
I might have an answer, might be right, because we like the new one. The new one is one.
Okay.
Also, like the very essence of the mitzvah, like technically you just need one. The rest is all hiddur mitzvah.
Right. That would have been my answer based on the Rambam that I mentioned last week, and that I mentioned also in Shul on Shabbat. Remember, the Rambam says really the essence of the mitzvah. The Gemara says this too. The essence of the mitzvah is to light one candle per household. One candle. That's the ner. Beyond that, it's like Benji said, it's the hiddur mitzvah. It's the beautifying the mitzvah. It's making it better, making it more ideal. And as we mentioned, nobody I know of only does the bare minimum of this mitzvah. Everybody I know, even people who are not religious, light Hanukkah candles, and they always light one the first night, 2 the next night. Nobody does only one candle per night per household, right? So, but anyway, but yes, Benji is right. That is probably the answer. You're basically saying the same thing, by the way.
Rabbi, so if you light the menorah outside of your house, then you don't make a bracha?
Correct.
Okay.
That's what he's saying. You're not really fulfilling the mitzvah. The mitzvah is ish ubeto. The person in their house fulfills the mitzvah. So if you're residing in that other person's house, it should not be a problem. But if you're just there for a short time, maybe it's probably better for you to light when you get home. And if you can't, if let's say you're out of town and you're living there, there are different situations, of course. Let's see. Let me. So anyway, the point is Hanukkah is much older than we think, much older than almost any holiday. Sorry, get back. we have evidence of Jews celebrating this holiday earlier than almost any other holiday. We don't really, I mean, the Torah, beyond the Torah, like scientific historical evidence, there's very little evidence that we celebrate too many holidays. Hanukkah is well established, entrenched in Jewish practice, at least 2,200 years of celebrating Hanukkah and celebrating it according to halacha, because halacha is what keeps Judaism alive. That's really what I wanted. That's really my point here today. And so I hope you enjoy the rest of your Hanukkah. Our next class next Monday night. Our next class is Wednesday night. We'll be on the Parsha, God willing. And our next Monday night class will be not about Hanukkah anymore. It'll be, unfortunately or sadly, it'll be back to Jewish life cycles. And I have an awesome video to show you of a real Pidyon Haben. Finally found it. Okay, and we'll start talking about Jewish education a little bit. Scary thought. All right, so let me stop the recording.